Hello and welcome to the Arrivals podcast. I've got Jessica Vanderwall here with me today.
Hello, Merelise.
Thank you so much for being here and for joining me. I am so excited for you to recap your birth stories for me and for everyone else. I think, not to spoil anything, but you've had 4 pretty different birth experiences, everything from hospital to home birth. So
wild.
Yeah, it's been a wild ride and I can't wait for everyone to hear all the details.
Super excited. Thank you for having me here. I feel very honored that you thought for me to come share my story.
Oh, absolutely. I'm honored that you would be willing to share them. And I'm especially excited. You know, as I always say, every birth is fascinating. And even when people think they've had, quote unquote, boring birth, they're always still interesting. But I'm very excited to hear your home birth. You're one of the few people I know who's given birth at home. And so I'm very excited to hear about it.
I'm very passionate about home birth. So I'm just excited to pull back the curtain and share a little bit about that.
Amazing. Well, I think we probably should start at the beginning rather than the end. So do you want to start with your first daughter's birth?
Yes. So I guess to give some context here, it's still wild to hear people say I have 4 kids. Every time I hear it, I'm like, how do I have 4 kids? But yeah, first, just want to say thank you for doing this. I think looking back at my 25-year-old self when I had my first daughter, Vanessa, and I was just terrified about the process of giving birth and what that was going to look like. I wish I had found something like this to kind of understand more about what the options were, just hear other women's stories. So I think what you're doing is awesome. And there's so much wisdom in sharing birth stories. And so I just appreciate all that you're doing. And I love hearing your passion about it. I work with Merelise's husband. So being able to hear Chris talk about it in such a way just made me very excited for you and to join you today. So thank you.
You're going to make me cry before we even talk about babies.
No. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
I will say that having a home birth was not just an out of the blue, wild decision that I had one day. I had to really think about why I wanted to do that. And I think it was the other 3 births that I did experience is what ultimately led me to that decision. And so my first daughter, Vanessa, she was born in 2018 and I was 25, living in Florida at the time. None of my friends were having babies or even pregnant. I feel like birth was one of those things that people just don't openly talk about or talk about pregnancy. And so I was kind of just in a stage of my life where I was kind of terrified. And so I'd moved back to Atlanta, back to be closer to family, to have her. And she was a large baby. So she was born right at 10 pounds.
Wow.
And so she was induced. I was full term.
Leading up to before you had her, were there concerns with her size? Had the doctors flagged it?
So all of my pregnancies have been very low risk, honestly, very easy pregnancies for what you imagine a pregnancy to be. Never had any complications, but Vanessa was getting large. And so I think for me, I had known that I always wanted to have a vaginal birth just with all of my kids. And so according to the doctor, the chances of that were going to start getting reduced if her size kept getting large. And so because she was full term, they're like, let's go ahead and induce you versus going over 40 weeks. And so let's get induced. I didn't really know anything at the time and didn't do a lot of research, just kind of took what I was being guided by my doctors at the hospital that was the best plan. And I do think it was ultimately a good decision. But at that time, I was not dilated whatsoever. I think I was 30% effaced. So my body, I don't think was physically ready for labor. I wasn't there yet, but I did get induced Pitocin and had, I think, a 36-hour window from when I had been induced until when Vanessa was born. Wow. So very long. And I did go in with the intention of wanting an epidural. So I got the epidural kind of at the first inkling of pain. I was get me out. I wanted the epidural.
Yeah, first contraction.
Yeah. And it was just me and Sean. Didn't have any family. I think I was I'm naturally a very reserved, just shy, conservative person. I just wanted me and Sean in the room and the doctor. And during my doctor's rotation, there was a medical student that was wanting to be an ER doctor that had to check the box for his rotation for labor and delivery. So he was in there with me, which I was already kind of anxious about. So I got the epidural and immediately just got full body chills, had lost complete control. I was shaking. They had to keep me on my back on the delivery bed and was having just a lot of pain, even though I'd had the epidural. And so kind of fast forward a little bit, labor was prolonging. I was not progressing. And I had heard conversation of, we might need to start thinking about a C-section if labor doesn't progressed. They'd increased the Pitocin.
Do you remember at what hour this was since starting Pitocin?
I think I was past the 24-hour mark.
Wow.
It was the next day. And I remember just at that point, I wasn't really in pain from the contractions. Honestly, I had no idea when I was having a contraction unless I saw it on the monitor. So I didn't really have a way of listening to my body, knowing what it was doing because I was on medications and just didn't really know. But I remember at one point just like bawling my eyes out. And I think I was just overwhelmed with the fact that I was having a baby, but didn't know I was like really physically having a baby.
Yeah.
I wanted my mom. There was this stranger, this man in there literally holding one of my legs because I was pushing, and just kind of felt out of control in a situation where I wanted to have control. And so labor was progressing and Vanessa was kind of wedged in a way where it was going to be hard for me to push. And so they had to end up doing an episiotomy. And then I got a 4th degree tear with her, and they had to do a vacuum delivery just because I didn't know when to push other than when the doctor was telling me to push. And so I think just my hormones plus the Pitocin plus just not understanding what was going on just made labor a very hard process. And so she was born, and obviously very grateful for the birth of Vanessa, but my postpartum recovery probably to this day is still very traumatic for me. And just thinking back on it, it was a time in your life when you're supposed to be just so, excited, and then these beautiful emotions. And I was very much, wasn't postpartum depression, but just having a very hard time physically recovering from that birth. And so I knew like going into it again, I wanted a hospital birth, my second birth, but I just did not want to get induced.
If I can back up just for a second, do you remember when the decision was made for the episiotomy? Did they ask you? Was it a consent?
No, there was no. I'm sure they told me what the OB was about to do, but there was no, do you consent to this? I'm sure it was all within like what they were supposed to do, and I'm sure that's what kept me from doing a C-section ultimately. So I would have consented. It just wasn't how I ever envisioned my birth going. It's kind of like your wedding day. You have a vision of your wedding day, and certain things will play out and get as close to that as you have pictured. But everything I had pictured was not playing out. So that's after that, 2 years went by and we got pregnant with Silas. And that was in August of 2020. So right after kind of COVID had shut everything down. And so that birth was automatically different, or at least my prenatal care, because Sean couldn't go to any of the appointments with me. I know you understand that very well. And so I was already coming off of so scared and kind of tainted from my first birth to now kind of having to do it all by myself again. And so I think going into that, I was already now scared because COVID. And I was like, well, what happens if baby gets COVID, or there wasn't like enough studies out yet for prenatal care and COVID. And so
you're bringing a lot of fear into the second birth.
All I knew is I did not want to be induced. I did not want to have to experience like the things that my body went through with the first induction. And I know that inductions are very important and very useful for a lot of women. If I was able to not get induced, I did not want to get induced.
Was he pacing to be big as well?
No. So all of my babies, I think, have been on the larger side, but he was my smallest. He was 7'12". So very good, healthy size.
So that's wild. Usually, I think we've talked about this before. You usually hear about babies increasing in size. And your first was your biggest.
Yes. I always tell her she's a force to be reckoned with ever since she was born, but all in a good way. But no, so Silas, I was full term with him as well, not induced, but I did have a hospital birth with him. So got to the hospital, very rushed.
Had your water broken, or were you having contractions?
I was having really intense contractions. And so, kind of like the movies, my husband's like flying down the interstate to get to the hospital, get there. But with COVID, it's just different, like the way you check in and get to your room. And so they took us back. I think we even skipped triage and went straight into the labor and delivery room. They did a quick COVID swab and it came back positive. And I was asymptomatic. I had no symptoms of COVID. So I think immediately I was like, oh no, I have COVID. Like, what's going down? Am I going to get to have the baby and hold him when he's born? I'm very anxious, and I could feel my blood pressure going up from there. But he was born extremely fast, did not have an epidural with him, but I was asking for one. And once I tested positive for COVID, it was kind of like you're down this special hallway, and no one came and checked on us for like the remainder of the time until my husband pressed like the panic button. And I think I was telling him, get me the epidural, press the button. The nurse came in and I was like, I think I need to push. I don't have time for the epidural. And she was like, no, don't push. We're not ready. And I think I just remember thinking in the back of my head, I know there's protocols, but how can you tell me like I'm not ready to have a baby? Like I know that I'm about to have a baby. And so,
and I think they're probably used to women with epidurals where they can
there's
say
more
that.
time.
You can say like, don't push, because your body
Right.
isn't necessarily giving you the urge to push. But when you don't have that blocking that feeling, a lot of times it's literally uncontrollable, that feeling.
And looking back at it, I understand like it was very fast by the time I got there and got settled, got the test, and it all within 20 minutes. And it was like, I need to have this baby. And I just think they were, trying to figure out like their next step and what they were going to do, because I tested positive for COVID.
It was wild times.
Wild. Yeah. And so he was born without any like Pitocin or the epidural, and I did not have any tears with him. And labor was quote unquote easy, but very fast. And so,
did you find the laboring part, like, it sounds like it was very fast, so that's a blessing and a curse.
Right.
Did you find the actual laboring part more painful or the delivery part more painful with him?
I don't remember like pain really being a concern. I was in pain because I was asking for the epidural, but I think it was just all happening so fast that I didn't really have time to like sit there and contemplate. I think I was more concerned that I had COVID. Like it was just in the back of my head, and I was like, what happens when the baby's born? Can I have him, or
I remember
is
that
there
so
fear?
Distinctly, all those
and
fears.
So I think that was more so what I was just fixated on, was making sure that I could hold him without risking him getting sick. But I think because I was asymptomatic, the fear of that kind of reduced after I had him. But I think I was still in the back of my mind, like it still wasn't like the birth experience that I was wanting, because it just felt so rushed and hurried, more so because my body was doing it pretty quickly. But just, I wanted to have more time to like live in the moment and enjoy the situation. I know that kind of sounds weird, but just wanted to have that moment that I, for some reason, had pictured in my mind. And so then with Everly, fast forward 2 years after that, in 2022, this is going to sound wild probably to a lot of your listeners, but I did not know that I was pregnant with Evie until I was 5 months pregnant, which I sound crazy for even saying that out loud. And most people are probably like, how do you not know that your body's pregnant? But there was a lot of things leading up to that. I was still nursing my baby at the time, or my toddler. They were 2 under 2.
How old was Silas when you got pregnant with Evie?
Gosh, he was 23 months when I had Evie. So a year and
just over a year.
Yeah, a little over a year. And so I've always nursed my babies pretty long, but I was still nursing him. I had no like physical signs of.
Had you gotten your period?
No.
Wow.
Had never gotten my cycle. Took 3 pregnancy tests, and they
there
were
was that
all
old
negative.
Oh my
and
gosh.
It wasn't like I took them all like in the first month. Like I took them over a period of time. So in the back of my head, I kept thinking, I've got to be pregnant.
That is wild that many pregnancy tests were negative.
Yeah, I've never had that. And went to my doctor, my OB at the time, and I was like, I don't feel good. Like I think there's something wrong. And it was all just kind of hormones.
Had you gained weight at all?
Very little.
Yeah.
So it was not a lot of weight to make me think I'm pregnant. I did not have like a baby belly. I'm naturally like very tall. So my babies generally take.
Do you usually not show until later?
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
And so there was like things where I'm like, maybe I'm pregnant. Maybe I'm, anywho, ultimately I was pregnant, but a little far along to kind of start thinking of what I wanted to do in terms of my birth. It was kind of like, all right, we're doing this in a couple of months. So had Evie at the hospital. She was an even quicker labor and delivery. Woke up in the middle of the night with her having contractions, went straight to the hospital again, rushed there, and she was born within 7 minutes of me getting there.
So that was precipitous labor. Like from first contraction, it was less than 3 hours. Wow.
Yes.
And so was Silas as well, technically?
He was very fast.
Wow.
Yeah. When I got to the hospital, he was like within 25 minutes.
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
I always say Vanessa cleared the way.
Yes, she did.
Yeah.
She made it easy on everyone else.
So she was born again very quickly, and I don't know, just in my head, I kept thinking, is this normal? Like, do all births happen like this? Very fast and with like a vengeance, it felt like. And so with her, knowing I was pregnant to having her was all just very quickly. And so I think 2 years after that, when we found out we were pregnant with Archer, as soon as I found out I was pregnant, which was very early, like 4 weeks at this point, I just knew. I was like, I'm having a home birth.
Yeah.
Hadn't done any research on it yet.
Yeah.
I just knew that that's what I wanted to do if my pregnancy was low risk and baby was healthy, and he was. And so at that time, I had stumbled across social media is great in terms of being able to get
Find a
connected.
community.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I had found this lady, Shannon Tripp, highly recommend her. And she had had 5 home births, and she was an ER nurse and just always talked about birth in this way where it was like this beautiful, sacred process and moment. And I'm like, I would love to have that.
I want
And so,
that. Yeah.
yes, I was like yearned for it. And I didn't know that I was yearning for that, but I was. And so I brought it up to my husband, Sean, and he's like, you want to do what? I was like, I want to have this baby at home. And I think initially he was like thinking of like the fear side of things. And I think that's people's natural reaction when you talk about a home birth. It's like, well, what if X, Y, and Z happens? Like, what do you do? And I think that's a very natural response. And I think I would have that response to someone if I didn't know anything about home birth as well. But it's really so empowering and so peaceful, at least the experience that I had, and just so calming, and the best birth experience and recovery that I've had of any of my babies. And so I think, and a lot of people, I would just encourage that with a home birth, there's so much preparation and education that goes into it, probably more than any preparation I would have ever had going to a hospital.
Yeah. Can you tell us a little bit about what the preparation was like?
Yeah. So first, in the state of Georgia, you cannot be a licensed midwife unless you are a nurse. And so that was kind of the first thing I had stumbled upon. And I'm like, well, can I even find a midwife and not have to go through a hospital setting? As I did not want to go through a hospital setting. I wanted everything to be done through my home or a birthing center. And so I interviewed a lot of different midwives, and then ended up stumbling upon one from word of mouth through like a friend of a friend of a friend that had used her, and just instantly felt like she was going to be the one that delivered my baby.
How did you find the other ones? Just online?
Online.
Yeah.
Yeah. And just went to their offices, and most of them, you know, have a little like a retail, it's like almost like a retail shop, or out of their home, or they come to your home.
Like a boutique practice.
Yeah.
What was it about the other ones that didn't feel right versus the one that you went with?
You know, I think it's just, when you know.
Yeah.
And I think just the conversations that we would have, just the time that she took to get to know me or ask me about my other babies or what I was looking for. And she also approached it from a very like informed perspective. I wanted it to go into it to someone that had at least been doing it for a long time, just because it was so new to me and so different from all the births that I'd had. And she was also licensed in the state of Tennessee. And so she did have that extra layer of licensure, which I kind of just made me feel safe about it. But she was just very calming and just felt like we connected very well.
Are there any important questions that you think people should ask when they're interviewing midwives?
For me, it was, this is like what I want my plan to be. But then she was always very much like, let's talk about what you would do if the situation went like this, or what if the situation went like that. In terms of specific questions, I think for me, it was just her like experience and wanting to understand, you know, how many births has she delivered, and her experiences there, and if there needed to be a backup plan, had she done that before? And just, I think along the way in my prenatal care, I felt like, you know, the gestational diabetes test or anything that had come up, she'd always say, here's 3 or 4 other options that you can do, or you don't have to do it at all. And so I think that that was comforting for me, or also important that it wasn't like one size fits all. You can do a variety of things and still have a very healthy baby.
Yeah. So all of your prenatal care was through her. You did not go to traditional practice.
Never went to an OB whatsoever. So she had an office, and I would go to her office, the same cadence for prenatal care as I would with a midwife. And I think a lot of people, they always ask me this question, is what's the cost for a midwife? And I think that was one question that I had going into it too, is how does insurance pay for this, or how does this work? And usually it is self-pay. At least in my experience, there's been no insurance that covers it unless you do like a reimbursement. I know there are some insurance companies that are open to that, but mine did not. However, the total cost for prenatal, post-care, and the delivery was the same as what my hospital birth would have been for my out-of-pocket.
Wow.
So it was really like, why not?
Right. It's really good to know.
Yeah. And every single appointment was blocked for 1 hour.
Mm-hmm.
Whether it
Rather than
was,
15 minutes.
yes, whether it was just, a baby check and you're in and out, it was, this hour is for yours. If you want to talk about whatever you want to talk about for an hour,
Amazing.
you have it.
Something that I feel really strongly about that I did not experience is continuity of care.
Yeah.
Like, so not only are you seeing the same person every time, but she is taking the
Yes.
time to get to know you and spend time with you. And so
Yeah.
you're building this relationship and this rapport with someone that's going to be part of one of the most important moments of your
Yes.
life. And that's
Yes.
just incredible that you
It
had
was
that.
great. Yeah. She knew me. She knew my family. She met my kids. And so I think, she's not seeing the same volume as patients, but she does. It is very much more, I think, that relationship versus, like the turnover that the hospital is having to go through. And so that was very important to me too, is that if I'm inviting you into my home to deliver this baby, I want to make sure like we have that relationship. And the postpartum care was also incredible with her. But touching more on the home birth and like the preparation side of things, you have to prepare like physically, mentally, emotionally in your home. Like you've got to have all the things prepared versus just going to a hospital. And I think mentally I was so on board with like wanting to do it that it never crossed my mind. I didn't have any doubt of maybe this isn't a good decision. And so I just remember like me and my husband would talk and kind of come up with game plans and like picture how we wanted our room to look when we had the baby. And my initial thought was I wanted a water birth. So we had purchased like the water birth tub and the birthing kit and read all the things about that. And that ultimately was not what I did.
I'm just taking a step back. Did you do any other mental preparation? Like I know a lot of hypnobirthing is really popular, visualization, meditation. Did you do any of that with any of your unmedicated births?
I did some breathing work, which I think is very important no matter what kind of birth you're having. And so I did that with my midwife. We had a few like 30-minute sessions, like practicing on breathing, which was great. I think the more control you have over that, the more you have a controlled labor. I read a few like blog posts. I never read any books or anything, but just kind of went into it with the mindset is I can do this.
When it was your fourth birth too.
Yeah, I kind of knew like what I was expecting, but also just it was so important to me to have this birth where I wasn't scared and where I had informed consent and where I just understood. I just wanted to be able to experience the process of actually having a baby and it not being like rushing to a hospital or rushing to a room or having COVID or in those crazy times or just not having control over what my body was doing. So that was probably the most important thing to me.
Yeah.
So fast forward to Super Bowl Sunday. That's when Archer was born. And I remember my neighbor had texted me, or a girlfriend in my neighborhood, and was like, let's go for a walk. We're going to walk this baby out. And so we did.
Was he past due at that point?
No, he was a week early.
Okay.
So or 4 days early, somewhere around there. And so we had gone for like a 2-mile walk. And I remember a few hours later, I thought I was having like small contractions and my kids were outside playing with my husband. And I told him, I think I'm like having some contractions. I'm going to go lay down, but nothing was consistent. There was no pattern. And so around that time it was like 4:00 and I was like, I'm going to prep dinner for the kids. Why don't you go bathe them? I'm just going to take it easy, which one thing consistently with all of my babies, whenever I know my body is like heading towards labor, I'm very food averse. I don't want anything to eat. And so in that moment, I wanted nothing to eat. So I kind of knew, I'm like, all right, something's going to happen.
So do you text your midwife? That's actually another question I had is how does the timing work? Like that always seems like it's tough to line up.
So usually from what I've interviewed several midwives is that they want to be able to live within 1 hour of where you live. And so she was about 45 minutes from me. So kind of on the cusp of the distance.
Do they block so that someone's not giving birth at the same time as you? How do they handle that?
Yeah. So she doesn't take any more than 3. Very rarely will she take no more than 4 per month.
Okay.
So she has kind of her cadence and she tries to schedule them out at least all within, or at least a week gap between each child or between each birth. And she has an assistant.
Okay.
And so she takes an assistant with her to every single birth. And there are usually other midwives and they'll use my midwife as an assistant and kind of help each other out.
There's a backup plan.
Yes. And she was 10 minutes from me. And so I texted my main midwife and I was like, hey, putting you on like baby alert. I think I'm having contractions, but nothing is consistent. And she was like, okay, well, with it being your 4th baby, like keep me up to speed on everything. And
your other being so fast.
Yes, that was my biggest concern. I'm like, once it starts, I'm just very concerned it's going to be like right away.
Yeah.
And so it was about 7:00. So a few hours had passed actually. And Sean had gone to put two of my kids to bed. Silas, he kind of could understand. I was like, I think I'm going to have a baby, or like God's going to bring the baby. And so he wanted to lay in bed with us and watch the Super Bowl for a little bit. So I let him do that for about 30 minutes. And then my mom came over and took him to bed. And then at that time, contractions were like every 7 minutes apart, but still pretty far apart. So I texted my midwife again. And I was like, hey, they're getting a little more consistent, a little bit stronger. And she's like, all right, I'm going to start heading that direction in about 15 minutes. I was like, okay, great. And then they all of a sudden went from 7 minutes to about 4 minutes. Literally within like 90 seconds, they were getting very consistent and stronger. So we kind of turned off the lights and had like fairy lights and some candles lit. We still had the Super Bowl on. It was on mute. And I had played just worship music, kind of helps me get in my mindset. And so my husband's just kind of laying there watching the Super Bowl, but also like, you know, talking to me, making sure I needed everything that I needed. My mom's in there timing contractions. And then they're starting to get about every 2 minutes. And my midwife was like, all right, I'm about 35 minutes away. I'll see you in a little bit. Go ahead and get the birthing tub situated.
Oh my gosh. She was being very chill about this. 2 minutes apart, I would have been
she
like.
was thinking, we got a little bit of time. And so my husband had prepped the birthing tub. And then once he got it filled up, I was like, you know, I don't think I want to use this anymore. And I just wanted to kind of let gravity do its thing. And so I was kind of leaning on the bed and had the birthing ball.
And what's the thing, like once you get in?
Yeah. So once you get in the birthing tub and you're in active labor, you have to like stay immersed in the water. If you're getting up and down, if the baby were to be born, it can cause, you know, water to get in their lungs. So I wanted to be able, I felt like standing was the most comfortable for me, or being able to just kind of lean on my bed or be able to walk around.
So nice to have the option.
Yeah. So I abandoned that plan, but yes, it was so nice to kind of be able to just have the options to do as my body wanted to do and not be kind of on any technology or any monitors, and just kind of have the freedom to listen to what Archer was telling me and what my body was telling me. And I just felt very in tune with him as he was getting, you know, lowering down. And as I was needing to push, I just felt like I had complete control.
And so, you know, before the midwife gets there, you don't have any sort of monitoring of his heart rate, nothing.
No.
Yeah. You're just going with the flow. Yeah.
Yes. And so the midwife, their assistant, is what I've been told is, the assistant is always tasked with identifying any potential risk upon entering, you know, delivery. So she is kind of checking the scene. Is there any, you know, bleeding? Is your heart rate elevated? They are checking your pulse, and you're checking for a temperature, no temperature. So they're kind of evaluating very quickly if there's any risk there, but my midwife was not there yet. And so at this point, contractions are, as soon as I'm getting out of a contraction, another one is coming. So they're very much back to back, but I'm not feeling like pain. It's a very much controlled discomfort, but I never felt like I was in this position where like I didn't have control over my breath. I felt like I was talking to Archer the whole time and just felt kind of like very in tune with myself, which I know I already had 3 other babies, but I had never experienced what I was experiencing in that moment. And just, you know, birth for me is a very spiritual and religious process. So I just felt like heaven was like in my room, and I was just such a holy moment and a sacred moment, and kind of the birth that I had wanted that I had never had. And so my water at that point had not broken, and the contractions were getting very close. And then I stood up and my water had broke. And at that time I had like called out to Sean, and I was like, I need to push. And then at that point, the midwife came running through the door. I did one push and Archer was born.
Oh my gosh. And were you leaning over a bed?
I was leaning over my bed, and then my midwife caught him and put him immediately on me as I was still standing, but made sure I got into the bed. And then I held him for about an hour, just straight skin to skin, as she's kind of evaluating immediately. Midwives always come prepared with oxygen, IVs, resuscitation equipment, everything that you could possibly need on hand at a hospital. And then if there's a risk, they transfer you to a hospital or to an emergency room. So we kind of had all the options taped up on our fridge of what we were going to do if there was an identified risk. Then we did the delayed cord clamping, which I always wanted. Sean got to do that. And then they weighed him right in front of me. There was no like taking him and wiping him down or any of that. It was all just on my bed with us. And it was just such a glorious moment, and one that I feel like will be etched in my brain forever. And then the midwives clean everything. So I'm kind of in preparation. People are like, do you give birth on your bed? And
Yeah.
you totally can. We just took off all of our bed sheets and our comforter, and we laid down a shower curtain.
Oh yeah, I was gonna
And
ask.
then just an old sheet that we got and put over that. And so I was fully prepared if I wanted to give birth on the bed.
Yeah.
And then after he was born, delivered the placenta on the
Mm-hmm.
bed. And then oddly enough, we still have the placenta. It is in my freezer. And so just to say, your placenta has so many like nutrients. I know some people encapsulate it, but it's sitting in our deep freezer outside. And one day we'll plant a tree in honor of Archer, and then the placenta will be under the tree. And it's supposed to be like the more nutrients that tree will have compared to any other tree. So
beautiful.
it's really awesome, like how your body serves your baby, and then afterwards how we can use it. So I know that's kind of odd, but we're excited to do that.
I think it's really sweet.
Yeah.
And I think also if you look at a placenta, it kind of looks like a tree.
Yes.
You know, all the veins and everything that run through it.
Yeah.
It's a tree of life.
Yeah.
It's incredible. It's an amazing organ.
Hospital, and I think some doctors do a good job of this. After you deliver the placenta, they'll show it to you, but I had never seen it before. So I had no idea other than Googling what a placenta was. But the midwife would like go through the whole thing with me and like use it as an education moment. And my husband loved that. And then same with the cord. They would stretch out the umbilical cord and kind of show you the cord and explain the color. And yeah, it was really neat.
That's amazing. And so one push and he was out. How much did he weigh?
Archer was 8 pounds and 4 ounces.
Okay.
So still a good baby. Yeah.
And no tears?
I had tiny, tiny little tear that had one stitch, but it was nothing, I had no issues with it.
And did any of the kids wake up during?
They did not, which was also really cool. I didn't want them to, I thought they were too little to like experience the actual birth, and I didn't want them to be traumatized, but it was so awesome the next morning when they woke up and came downstairs, and they're kind of like, how did the baby get here? And the baby was born, and they all got to see him before they headed off to school. But just like being in my home, and the midwife came back the next day and they offered to like cook you breakfast or make a meal for you. And she would just check on me and the baby and look us all over, and was really there for anything that I needed.
Yeah. So I was going to ask, what did the postnatal care look like? How many days did she come back?
She came back the day after, and then she came back again 4 days later. And then I went to her office at 6 weeks.
Okay.
And then I think I had one more appointment left if I wanted it before I'm technically not a patient anymore. I think that was at 6 months.
And then for Archer, the pediatrician part of it, did you take him at some point?
Yeah.
A pediatrician?
So that can be a tricky part when you're, before you have a baby, you're calling the pediatrician to kind of tell them this is when the due date is going to be, and I want to bring him here for primary care. And there are some pediatricians that don't recognize a home birth as, I guess, an authorized birth for their practice. And they want a medical professional, a doctor, to check off, all the things before pediatrician for liability purposes, even though the midwife did the hearing screening, did all the normal tests that they do in a hospital. Because in the state of Georgia, midwifery is not a licensed profession. They did not accept it, even though it was the same paperwork. Everything was the same tests and everything. But yeah, they would not. So we had to really shop around. It sounds weird. Shop around and find a pediatrician, which we finally did find one that would take him. And now all my kids go there. But
so was that part of the pre-birth process? Like your prep for it?
Yeah. So that was part of it. And I didn't realize that some doctors don't recognize, a lot of doctors or pediatricians don't recognize that. So that took me about 3 months to find somebody that would take him.
Wow. That's so wild.
Unless I had gone to a hospital after delivery and had him looked over, then they would take him.
But that's like kind of defeats a lot of the purpose of the home birth.
I know.
Like not being, not having to leave your bubble and just being able to soak it all in. And
And I know everyone has, the medical world has reasonings, and I understand that, but I think a lot of it is just, in the same sense, a little ridiculous. But it worked out, and it was a great experience, and I would do it again or recommend it to anybody. Not that I'm having another baby, but I would do it again. I would have a home birth again. It was just the best experience. And I think there's not a lot of people that talk about home birth. I think there's a weird stigma around it, that it's what the hippies do, or that's what I've been told. And I'm like, it's so just empowering. And there's so much prep work and education that goes into it. Way more than I did when I was delivering at a hospital.
Yeah, it's much less passive than it seems like, at least. Yeah.
Very, very intentional and very much prepared. And it made I think my husband get more prepared too, because he was kind of the one that was stepping in before the midwife could get there, prepping the birth tub and making sure I was okay and looking for any warning signs if things were not going well.
And how amazing for him to be empowered as well, to be a part of your
Yes.
birth.
Yes.
And that's such an incredible point of connection for you
Yeah.
guys.
It was incredible. Yeah. And I think for the first baby, that one I was so young, but the second baby during COVID, he couldn't really be a part of any of it. And then with the third, not really knowing until I was later, he had kind of missed out, I think, on a lot of it as well. And so he really enjoyed it too.
Oh, it's amazing.
Yeah.
I remember when you told Chris that you were going to have a home birth.
Yeah.
I think I can't remember exactly how it went, but he was like,
don't tell Merelise.
Yeah, he was like, you're not allowed to talk to Jessica at the Christmas party. I don't want you getting any ideas. Because I had always been, obviously as I've gotten more and more into the birth world and fascinated by it and learned more about it. Of course, I listen to a lot of podcasts and several people that I listen to regularly have had home births, and it just sounds so beautiful and so incredible. And so that was always kind of in the back of my mind, but I just didn't have the guts, if you will, to follow through. So I loved getting to live vicariously through
and
you.
I think, home birth too, it's not for everybody, and it's not better than any other type of birth. I think for me, it was just the best option that I had, or a plan that I wanted to follow through with. But by no means is it a better method of having a birth than a hospital birth or whatever someone chooses to have a baby. But for me, it was such the sensory details that I remember from that birth. First, I can smell the room, I can see the room, just visualize it so crystal clear. And I don't have that same recollection of my other births. And so I think it was just a totally different experience. And I think one that in a lot of ways healed me from the experience that I had with Vanessa and with Silas. It was just something that I had yearned for, and the Lord knew that on my heart, and it was able to happen.
Yeah, that's amazing. I'm so happy that you're able to have that for you, for your kids.
And since I do have babies fast, I was terrified. I'm like, I don't want to have this baby in a car. I just wanted to be able to experience birth.
Well, and to your point about having some control, like knowing that you have babies quickly, it's like, okay, well, you start to lose some of the control in that aspect. If you're going to have it quickly, like you don't want to have it in the car, like might as well be intentional about where you're going to have it and do it the way you want to do it. And I loved what you said too about like home birth is not better, than another type of birth. And I feel that just so strongly. And that's part of really what I'm trying to accomplish with this podcast is just every birth is unique and it's an independent individual choice.
Yes.
And the only thing that I would advocate for women to do is just to learn about what kind of birth you want rather than to just be told.
100%. Yeah. And I think that's why after I had my first 3 children, I had just stumbled upon this lady's Instagram account. And it's like, wow, if more women were talking about their stories or their experiences, or I had heard about this earlier, maybe I would have done it with my third. I don't know. But I just feel like there's so much power in educating each other, sharing our stories. And I think that the reach that you will have with that will just be tenfold.
And, and if after you go through all that and then you decide you want to have a scheduled C-section, like more power to you. Like
exactly.
Make that choice for yourself.
Absolutely.
But make the choice.
Yeah. I agree. So yeah, it's been a journey. All 4 of them were very different, but it's been just such a blessing, obviously, to bring 4 little babies into this world. But definitely the home birth has been an experience that I highly recommend if there's any moms out there that have it in the back of their head or wondering about it. It was a great experience.
What surprised you the most about it?
Oh man, I think just how easy it was. And I hate to say giving birth that wasn't easy, but just the whole process in itself, or just the amount of peace that I felt being in my home and waking up the next morning and my kids were there, and my postpartum recovery was so easy compared to the others. And I think it was just healing to be in my home and to be able to have that experience.
Was there anyone in your life that tried to scare you away when you decided that's what you wanted to do?
I don't think that there was anyone that tried to scare me. I think that there was some doubt in terms of, are you sure? And I don't think it was doubt because they didn't think I could do it. I think it was doubt that what if something happens?
Fear.
Fear. Yeah. And I think that probably stemmed mostly out of people that love me the most. My friends were all very supportive, but I could definitely see it from, my dad and my mom and just family, I think they were supportive of the idea and the concept, but because they loved me and they loved the baby, they were a little fearful at first.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Mm.
Well, thank you so much for sharing those
Yes.
stories. I always like to close with asking you to describe birth in 3 words. What comes to mind?
Mm. I think the first word I would think of, for me, it's just such a spiritual process. So I think spiritual would be one for me.
Mm-hmm.
It's just the closest I've ever felt, I think, to the Lord. And for me, that's such a holy moment. I think, there's a lot of like fun to be had with birth.
Yeah.
And I think that part isn't talked about enough. But I just remember my husband and I like making a few jokes or like talking about how exciting it's going to be when our 3 kids run downstairs the next morning. And I think having fun with it or just enjoying it,
Mm-hmm.
especially in your like last trimester when you're just miserable and you just want the baby out. I think it's trying to find the fun in that because it does go by so fast.
It's a good lesson for parenthood too. Like find the
Yes,
fun when
I
everything
know.
feels
When you feel
hard.
like your world is just
Mm-hmm.
crumbling, like there's so much goodness. That's like all the things you've ever prayed for right here. And
Mm-hmm.
so just trying to remember that each and every day. I think the third one, I don't know if it's a single word for it. Probably control. I think that
Mm-hmm.
was the most that I'd had control over not just my own decisions, but my body and just the process. So I think that would be the third one.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Oh, well, I truly appreciate it. I love hearing your perspective. I think so many people will enjoy it and be fascinated, whether they want a home birth for themselves or they're just more curious, like you said at the beginning, pulling back the curtain. So thank you for being so open. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Merelise.
All right. Well, you've been listening to the Arrivals podcast. Until next time.